Hello, my kako. All right. I want to get us to our presentation, so I guess I'll start us off today. So welcome everybody. Thanks for tuning in to our presentation. My name is Kaalalayawan. I am the Papahānaumokuākea program specialist at the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. OHA is one of the four managing agencies one of the four co-trustees and managing agencies for the Papahānaumokuākea Marine National Monument. OHA's main kuleana for Papahānaumokuākea is ensuring that our cultural traditions and our Native Hawaiian ike are perpetuated in Papahānaumokuākea and throughout our Papahana. One of the main things that we do is support our Native Hawaiian people to both access Papahānaumokuākea, but also to have opportunities such as the ones that we are going to share with you guys today. These opportunities are immensely important to helping us to, I guess, express our cultural traditions within and making sure that they live on in our Papahana today. So for us to begin, we wanted to start off with a mele to share about Papahānaumokuākea, to kind of just set the tone for all of us and put us in that space and put us in the right position to hear about what these great panelists have to share today. So Mele Papahānaumokuākea was composed by Kainani Kahaunaile and Hale Aloha Aiao, and they were on a trip to Papahānaumokuākea, I think this was in the early 2000s. So this is something that's very special to us, that we help to recognize this place. So 1 second. All right, I hope you guys can see that. Ma lama lama kala nuia ka ne buka iha iha e pa ka o ke kukunai ka ilika o na kai e walu e ike makawalu ka ue ano I neo na uwalu wa kana loa hauna vela no hui ka moana nui e kai ka makani o le hua au I ke kai ono ka lu o ku ai mo ana I ke kapa e hu kai o ka Lai o ku I ka lo lulu e ke aloha noni hoa moku manu o ku I ka ahui e alaka I naka la hui o hina pu koa o hina pu ala koa o hina kupuku o hina I ka mala mai ka ohua luku ke koha la aloha kaili mukala ia e ka akala no hoi uka no ka puka ka pea I ke kai e ina I ka ina ono I ka huna o ka paakai mano ka I ke liu o ka hopo kana loi ko I lua hoi no ka lehu o ku uluhi ai hano vale ka aina kupuna no moku le I no Papahānaumokuākea la e ino All right. So again, mahalo nui to everybody for joining. We have a great presentation for you guys today. I've learned a lot from all of these people that are joining us, and I definitely look up to them and love spending time in the meetings when we discuss these namings of species, and I hope you guys can learn a little bit from them too. I want to introduce you to somebody that has spent a lot of her time up in Papahānaumokuākea on various trips. In fact, if you look at my photo, I just dropped her off. She's on there right now. Her name's Kalika Andrade. And yeah, let's move along. So thank you guys for today. Kalika.
Aloha kākou. Velina mai e nā makamaka mai ka lahiki ma kumukahi a ka lākau ma nā papa kahakua ke olono o ia ho'i o Papahānaumokuākea. Aloha kākou. My name is Pelika Andrade, and I have the pleasure of introducing this panel from the Papahānaumokuākea Cultural Working Group's nomenclature Hui. I'm a Native Hawaiian born and raised on the island of Kauai and have a long history working with Hawaii's communities throughout the archipelago as a community member and Ho'aina. I've been involved with the Cultural Working Group since 2008, serving as the chair from 2011 to 2014, and I'm extremely proud of the work this group has done over the many years. But I'll leave those highlights for Blaine to touch on in a moment. Before we move into today's presentation and the introduction of our panelists, I would first like to thank Brad for opening this session. Brad Kaalalayawan is a Native Hawaiian from Kailua, Ko'olaupoko, Oahu. Above and beyond our OHA Kukulu Papahānaumokuākea program specialist fulfilling OHA's role in the Papahānaumokuākea Marine National Monument, Brad is also very active in other marine initiatives while advocating for Native Hawaiians and the inclusion of Hawaiian perspective and traditions within management. Brad is an avid paddler, fisherman, surfer, sailor, voyager, and training navigator on the Polynesian voyaging canoes Hokulea and Hikianalia. His voyages extend beyond the Pai'aina to include travels in Samoa, Aotearoa to Tahiti, Brazil to the Virgin Islands, Florida to Panama, and San Diego to Hawaii. Like our other panelists and many Hawaiian leaders, Brad wears many hats that serve and contribute to Hawaii. So mahalo nui, Brad. Now for our panelists. Blaine Pomaikai Benavides is the outgoing president of the board of Hui Mauliola, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting Hawaii and its people through the perpetuation of Hawaiian healing traditions and the cultivation of traditional Hawaiian health practitioners. From 2012 to 2015, he served as the NOAA Office of National Marine Sanctuaries Native Hawaiian Program Specialist. He was the chair of the Papahānaumokuākea Cultural Working Group Nomenclature Subcommittee in 2014 and 2015. A Hawaiian from Oahu, Blaine is a graduate of the Kamakakuokalani Center for Hawaiian Studies twice over, earning a Bachelor's of Arts in Hawaiian Studies and a Master's of Arts in Hawaiian Studies. He also completed the University of Hawaii Schauder College of Business Master of Human Resource Management program, where he focused on Hawaiian-based cross-cultural training and development. Blaine aspires to be a culturally minded supporter of his community and holds affiliations with Pa'aola Hawaii, Kapa'o Lonopuha, Pa'iviola, and the Halemua Kuali'i. Aloha, Blaine. Our next panelist, Hokupihana, is a Native Hawaiian mother, marine scientist, and conservation biologist. She was born in Wahioa, Oahu, and raised in Long Beach, California. She attained her BA and MS degrees at the University of Hawaii at Hilo and aims to use her education to give back to her island communities and speak for our natural resources in Hawaii and throughout the Pacific. Hoku is the current chair of the Papahānaumokuākea Cultural Working Group Nomenclature Subcommittee. Aloha, Hoku. Our final panelist, Noah Gomes, lives in Waiakea, Hilo, Hawaii, and is from Wahioa, Oahu, though his genealogy also ties him to Kama'o on Lanai. He has always had a soft spot in his heart for Hawaii's natural resources, especially the birds, and is active in the local conservation community and has been since he was a child. He spends his free time trying to learn as much as he can about life in the old days and about the land. He also paddled for several years with Puna Canoe Club on Hawaii Island. He holds an MA in Hawaiian Language and Literature from the University of Hawaii at Hilo. The topic of his master's thesis was on the system of bird hunting practices in Old Hawaii. Research from his master's thesis led to the reclamation of Old Hawaiian name Alawi for the Hawaii creeper in 2017. His paper, Reclaiming Native Hawaiian Knowledge Represented in Bird Taxonomies, came out last week, congratulations, and is also related to the subject of classical Native Hawaiian bird naming practices and is pending publication in Ethnobiology Letters. Professionally, Noah works for Kamehameha Schools Hawaii under Halau Kupu Kupu as a research consultant. His research interests include ethnobiology, indigenous geography, and history. Aloha, Noah. So what's in a name? Names carry so much meaning in history, from remembering an impactful moment in time, honoring a loved one, marking a funny, scary, or momentous event, describing behaviors, characteristics, and appearances, connecting into genealogy, expressing hopes of the future or dreams of the past. Names have so many layers, meanings, and representations, but what they all have in common is a relationship or reflection of a relationship embedded in them. The names I carry have many meanings, but are a reflection and a representation of the relationships belonging to my parents. Kaho'olawe has several names, like Kohemalamalama and Kanaloa, names with many meanings, all representing relationships of the people who honored and called out these names in reference and acknowledgement. Our stars carry names that have changed through time as the relationship has matured in more recent years. As our voyaging community becomes more seasoned and established, names mature and evolve based on the growing relationship we have with our celestial roadmap. Hokupa'a, or the North Star, named because of its fixed position in the sky, now carries another name, Mauloa, honoring Papa Maupiailug and his fixed position or role within the success of our contemporary voyaging legacy. Names represent these relationships and help us remember the stories that connect us to each other, to our communities, and to our Hawaii. Our panelists from Papahānaumokuākea's Cultural Working Group, Nomenclature Hui, representing many others, will now share how they've collectively brought their relationships and stories to this process and the beautiful relationships represented in these 5 highlighted species. Mahalo nui for joining us today, and now I'd like to pass this over to Blaine. Aloha.
What an intro. Mahalo nui e Pilika. Good morning, everyone. Mahalo to my co-panelists and our hosts for your experiential insights on today's topic, and for all the effort that you've given to bring these inoa to life. And a warm mahalo to the CWG for inviting me to speak about the history, processes, and early successes of the subcommittee. Our word of the poll is lolima. A simple interpretation for this concept could be Hawaiian stylized collaboration. Lolima is key to understanding our conversation because it is through Hawaiian value-based collaboration that we've seen sustained positive outcomes as a hui. No laila, mahalo to all who have put their hands, minds, and na'au to this work within the CWG and beyond. If we can cue up the PowerPoint, that would be awesome, please. Mahalo. The PMNM NHCWG nomenclature subgroup, which I'll be calling the nomenclature subcommittee for the rest of my little talk, is a joint agency-founded, community-centered group that was formalized by the United States in 2008 through the publishing of the PMNM Monument Management Plan. The subgroup reports to the PMNM Native Hawaiian Cultural Working Group, or CWG. The CWG was created in the early 2000s by the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands Reserve Advisory Council, the monument's overarching community-based advisory group. PMNM and the RAC formalized the subcommittee through activity NHCH 2.4 of the MMP, a directive to convene a variety of experts, including the Native Hawaiian Cultural Working Group, on the history and meaning of the Hawaiian names for known and yet to be discovered regions, islands, geographical and oceanic features, sites, and plant and animal species. These names and their histories and meanings will be included and updated regularly in the forthcoming Monument Information Management System to ensure that such names continue to reflect Hawaiian knowledge and experience, and processes will be established to ensure that the Native Hawaiian names are imbued with appropriate cultural authority and officially recognized in government records. I'd like to highlight that last part once again, officially recognized in government records. The activity shows the co-agency's call to action regarding the appropriate cultural imbuing of traditional names and knowledge within monument policy. Aside from the members of the CWG, others who guide this process include Native Hawaiian cultural practitioners and support staff who fill the ranks of the managing agencies, and other permittees who access the region, including highly specialized, world-renowned scientists and researchers who are rediscovering and discovering species and realms in the really vast region today. From a timeline-based perspective, and we can go to the next slide, please. The subcommittee was formed in the wake of the celebrated naming of the monument, a process led by the Cultural Working Group in 2007. Back then, the CWG reviewed submissions provided by multiple Native Hawaiian stakeholders and eventually selected the name Papahānaumokuākea, which is an inoa of traditional importance and esteem, a name that is tied to Mele Mo'olelo, referring to the creation of the Hawaiian chain, including the area now known as PMNM. Next slide, please. The inoa was submitted by Dr. Pua Kanahele, a world expert on Hawaiian cultural matters, who continues to provide guidance to the subcommittee in multiple roles. And this is a very important thing to note in regards to the group's operations because it highlights that the group is driven by widely held cultural principles, including the acknowledgement of the leadership roles that kupuna play in our operations. Other kupuna that have guided iterations of this project and the agencies that serve it include Uncle Eddie Ka'ana'ana, Dr. Isabella Abbott, Uncle Buzzy Agard, Auntie Wilma Holly, Auntie Laura Thompson, Auntie Walter B. Aldiger, and Uncle Umi Kai. And obviously this is an exhaustive list, so if you're thinking of a kupuna, mahalo nui. We'd also like to mahalo all of our kupuna who have contributed to the initiative. Mahalo nui loa. Another momi one might gain from the mo'olelo of the renaming of the monument revolves around the name Papahānaumokuākea itself and its formal adoption by the agencies. From my time working at NOAA, I can respectfully tell you that Papahānaumokuākea can be a long and difficult name for many. But in spite of this perceived difficulty, Papahānaumokuākea was still selected as the official name for the monument. The fact of the matter is that Papahānaumokuākea is an inoa filled with purpose, value, knowledge, and meaning. Its meaning supersedes any hang-ups that others may have, and it pays tribute to the po'i o Oivio Hawaii and from where we come. Please keep this in mind as we look at some of the recent selections made by the CWG, because you'll see that they too may share these similar properties. These inoa might seem long or funny looking to your eyes, but they hold important meaning and were chosen for reasons founded in purpose. Let's kind of transition and click to the next slide, please. And we're going to look at a basic process outline for the subcommittee. When a researcher believes that she has come across an unnamed species or region in the monument, or a species for which the monument has not yet identified in Inoa Hawaii, she's encouraged to approach the CWG with her data at a subcommittee meeting. Two things may happen. First, an Inoa may be easily identified and selected through the group's familiarity with the resource or similar resources, as highlighted in our traditional knowledge repositories. This is the rare of the two processes, so usually the committee decides to take some time to research culturally appropriate inoa, diving through the ancestral sea of Hawaiian wisdom and personal experience. They usually reconvene and review the names at the following meeting. In the meantime, questions are asked like, might there already be an inoa for the resource? And is the resource similar to something within our scope of experience? When the group reconvenes, it examines each possible inoa. Names are whittled down, and a name is selected when the group determines that it fits pre-developed criteria. We'll click to the next slide, please. Per its intent, the subcommittee decided in 2015 that its primary goal was to continue to push the agenda regarding reclaiming our spaces, building, strengthening, and continuing relationships with elements or species within these spaces. And it operates under the goal to continue to advocate for these names, these species, and these places. From a convention standpoint, the subcommittee values the proliferation of Olelo Hawaii in the research, selection, and application of these inoa. The group strives to connect with our leo makuahine at the highest levels possible while maintaining our own expression at the human level. We're not perfect in our process, but there is no human organization on earth that is, and we shouldn't have to be perfect. We're blessed, however, with members who are able to tap into culturally sound relationships, both intrapersonally and interpersonally, and there are immense Olelo Hawaii archival databases pertaining to Malamaina through vehicles such as Mo'olelo, Olelo Mo'eo, and Mele. At the same time, the group strives to improve our practice. Part of that growth includes the study and examination of Olelo Hawaii through intergenerational education and discourse. We also expand beyond that realm to include all our senses, not only in our thought processes and academic processes, but coming from our experiences in seeing, smelling, hearing, touching, and feeling the resources. Being in the field to connect with the resources when possible is of high importance and the gold standard, if you will. Unfortunately, due to restrictions and resource limitations, we can't always touch, taste, smell, hear, or feel the species, region, or element for which we are providing guidance. In these instances, we're provided with some wonderful virtual experiences via recorded data that's provided to the subcommittee by permittees and agency officials alike. So a big question regarding this process would be why? Why is the monument and the subgroup stressing the importance of assigning newer Hawaiian names to these resources? I've got two reasons for starters, and then I'd like others to chime in with their own mana'o later on in the presentation. Reason one. Well, there are many human layers to the history of the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands. It's impossible to deny that the Oiwi Hawaii layer is the first by far. Beyond being the first layer, one might consider the volume in which the Kupuna Hawaii built intimate relationships with the natural world around them in regions like Papahānaumokuākea. These relationships are founded in inquiry and cataloged for the benefit of future generations. Wavy connections to this region begin with the Mo'olelo of Kuaka'iko and navigators, creating, arriving, intersecting, and interacting at places like Niho and Mokumanamana, many of whom arrived in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands before settling in the current peopled Hawaiian Islands. These connections extend to the development of kupuna-constructed spiritual epicenters in the region, to the kuleana of the Ali'i o Kawaka'iko to invest in these spaces, including the Ali'i Nui Ka'ahumanu, who upon hearing about the islands in the 1810s, set sail on her own expedition to seek out Nihoa for herself. The long-standing familial connections that Ohana have to the region for fishing and other purposes, and to the national interests that were laid forth by the Hawaiian Kingdom in the 1800s, including the voyaging to and claiming of Nihoa and other islands in the region by His Royal Highness Alexander Liholiho Kamehameha IV and his agents in the name of the Hawaiian Kingdom, and the 1885 travels of then Kamali'i Wahine Li'uokalani and her party to Nihoa. We don't have time to discuss these connections in detail, but please note that they and many more exist and extend well beyond the initial 1903 policy that was internally developed by the United States government to administer over the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. So the subgroup, like the larger CWG and many of the cultural practitioners who access the region, are continuing in the spirit of these traditions in knowledge transfer by accessing these important bodies of Ike to fulfill a collective kulera to care for these Aina kupuna in a very specific way through the naming and renaming of our resources, which are also viewed as kupuna to many po'e Hawaii, in a way, calling them in the region back to our collective consciousness. These connections help to serve an important function for our peopled regions and the communities we call home, because they too are geographically, historically, biologically, spiritually, and politically connected to us, and more familiar land and seascapes. Reason two, and Pelika touched a little bit upon this, mahalo nui, some great insight. Names are super, super important in the Hawaiian culture. There's a wide held belief that like our lands and peoples, our names are living and breathing entities. And as Pukui and others noted in Nanaike Kumu Volume 1 about the power of names, syllables which identified a person could influence health, happiness, and even lifespan. They preface this idea by saying that Inoa is the greatest possession a person can have. And this mana'o can be beneficial for critically endangered species in the regions when we think about it. In motion, names bring us closer to each other, and in many cases, they tie us to our resources. So bringing forth a name is like bringing forth an entity unto itself and acknowledging the need for the namer to accept the kuleana to care for that which is named, which leads us to the point that this can be a very heavy process. An effort that we hold to a high standard, one that is well-defined, storied, and complex, reflective of traditional knowledge systems and values. Though lima is a necessity. Just like in traditional times, not all members of the subcommittee see eye to eye on the naming of every species or place. But guess what? That's super maikai, because it tells us that we are actually developing beyond our comfort zones via a group that consists of high-level, qualified, and diverse perspectives who are caring for the species in question the best that they can at this time. And secondly, it gives us an opportunity to come together to operate within our conventions to ensure that the group meets its goal, to provide a solid inoa for each resource we review. We are also determined to maintain a fluid approach and expect that some inoa will change over time. This is a natural process that's very much human and Hawaiian in its operation. The more we learn about the resources and our naming processes, the more connected we will be to those resources. And the more connected we are to those resources, the more capable we will be of caring for them. And with that, we're going to look at some of the early outputs presented by the group. Pelika, any insights on any of these outputs? So we've got a couple of terrestrial bird species. On the left side, we have the ekupu'u, the palihua, and the koloa pohaka kalawai. And they're all located at a place called Kamole. In English, it's known as Leistan. And then on the right, we have some of our Nihoa species, the ululu, and an albatross, the Makalena. Closely aligned with the subgroup have been certain groups that have traveled to places like Kuehelani out at Midway Atoll and have identified place names and names of importance that they're tied to. And lastly, we have a limu species. And I think Brad has a lot of experience with this limu species, but this is the Lauhi Koelo. It's been a very enriching process for most of us who have been involved in it. It's a developing process, of course, and you know it's a fairly new process. It's only been 14 years in which we've been engaging this level, but we've learned a lot, and we are very excited to continue. I think Brad has some manao that he wants to share about the Lauhi Koelo.
Oh, no, I'm not
I just see your face up
Kaika.
there, so okay, you know. And then after that, we're going to transition to the more exciting part. We're going to talk about some of the new species that were just released. Mahalo nui, everyone.
So aloha mai kākou. This is Hoku Pihana. Mahalo for having me. Jules, if we could move into the next section of our slides so we can introduce those names. One thing that we did want to just present you with before we move into the new names that we're going to announce is this image that speaks to undescribed bamboo corals that we were gifted and honored to name as well. And what this image really reflects is our process and our thinking patterns and what we see as we walk through understanding how to identify and give a name to a particular organism or species. So this is something that can be looked at and examined later, and perhaps in following webinars or future conversations, we could dive deeper into what this whole process is expressing in this image. But in our next slides, I do believe we'll be going on to the new birds. So to begin with, before I move into introducing these names, what I'd like to share is what guides my practices. So if you could move into the bird names, what guides my practices, my connection to my family. What I identify to me as, I identify my papa as being my va'an, my ocean, and my mother as being my aina, and then my children are my pai aina o Hawaii. And within this ohana understanding is what helps guides me in my practice, encourages me to engage in these conversations and be present and participate to perpetuating these practices for not only our generations, but the future generations of stewards that will be left to be caring, to care for these spaces and places. So in our next slide here, I'd like to present our first name, Au'o. So I'd like to share, so I'll be sharing with you the name for just the Christmas tree, shearwater, as well as the blue nabi. When we were given the opportunity to name these manu, the nomenclature committee was given information about them relating to their habitat, food sources, breeding behaviors, physical features, and so on. And so this information, when asked to give a name to a particular species, is something that we ask for to give us guidance and understanding of the organism that we're going to name or the place that we're thinking of. And so we took a look at these characteristics to help evoke the name that was given to the Christmas shearwater, Au'u. So we found that the Christmas shearwater lives in the tropical Pacific, including Johnston Atoll and possibly the Wake Atoll, and its breeding range expands throughout Papahānaumokuākea. It's a terrestrial bird, and it typically breeds on remote sandy islands in rock crevices and under dense vegetation. There are close to about 3,000 pairs breeding within Papahānaumokuākea. They occur across Laysan and Nihua, Midway, French Frigid Shoals, and Pearls and Hermes. In sharp contrast, throughout the main Pacific or Southeast Hawaiian Islands, there are roughly about 165 breeding pairs that are found in Niihau and Oahu. They tend to, they feed at sea, and they predominantly feed on squid and fish, mostly flying fish or goatfish, and they're highly pelagic, depending on predatory fish such as tuna to help with their diving and foraging feeding patterns. So as we learned and read and examined this information about their habitat, how they eat, how they breed, where they're from, what really resonated and stuck out to us was its call. In the description, the sounds were described as moans and groans. It was a bit nasally and gurgly quality, and it really captured the essence of what this bird is, beyond the visual and physical identity of the bird. And so that was really something that spoke to us when we were really starting to think about, what is this bird telling us? What is all this information speaking about in regards to this bird? So when we heard the call, it seemed fitting when we started to think about this bird. So I'm gonna, as we transition into the next slide, I'm gonna share with you the sound of this bird. So here's the sound of the au-u. So as you can see, that sound really resonated with us. And it sounded, that sound "oh" was heard in the first patterns of that the bird expressed. Oh, 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 oh. There we go. Oopsie, I forgot to turn off the thingy. And so that really helped us hear the bird beyond seeing the bird. And so as we all stood and shared and spoke of this bird, we took the time to really just make the sounds. And that, I think, too, is a part of our naming process. Not only are we visually looking at things and reading and learning, but we're also engaging with our own bodies and voices too, to really, for lack of a better phrase, be the bird. But so the au-u really represented that sound. Oh, 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 ooh. And so over and over and over again, as we did this, this name really, really resonated with us, that highlighted a really special and unique characteristic of the au-u. Additionally, when we were looking at the different words and forming the name, we had all of these, the other ike and information that was given to these names, which is listed here in the slide, that speaks also to au and u, that new shoot, that leaf, that taro. It's also the light of the day, and it's regaining of consciousness. So all of these definitions and identities of the word add depth to this name as well. And then, of course, with u, meaning to growl, grunt, groan, or moan, which also physically compares or aligns with its sound. So this was the name that we felt best suited the Christmas shearwater bird, au-u. So in our next slide, I would like to share the two names given to the blue noddy. So again, like the au-u, we were given the information about this bird to take a look at and understand both its physical characteristics, habitats, and breeding sites. And so what we found with the blue knobby was that it was distributed mostly in Papahānaumokuākea within fresh frigid shoals and Kure. It has been bred throughout the main Hawaiian Islands, and there have been populations found on the volcanic islands off of Japan. Their feeding habits, they generally forage offshore. They like on the water and hover, and they usually forage alone, but may join in mixed pairs to attract food. They feed mostly on fish, primarily lanternfish, and they do occasionally enjoy eating squid. So they are found, of course, on predator-free islands with sandy soils where they like to nest and burrow, excavate their nest to burrow. There are also breeding colonies in Hawaii and throughout the Papahānaumokuākea Midway Atoll National Wildlife Reserve. They tend to breed in the winter and nest in the summer, and they only lay one egg per season that is often cared for by the parents of that particular young. Again, like I mentioned before, they do nest in burrows that they excavate within sandy soils. And an interesting fact about the anyways, another thing to note about them is their location. They are found throughout the archipelago with 250,000, 395,000 breeding pairs, predominantly found throughout Laysan, Lisiansky, and Midway Atoll. So again, given the information and the understanding of this bird, we looked at its physical characteristics, its location, and its behaviors, and also relationships to other past names given. So what really came to us when we were looking at the blue noddy were two specific words, or excuse me, two specific names that spoke to the duality and the relationships of these birds. The names expressed the physical features and the foraging behaviors of our manu, as well as hinted or provided the balance, the hina, to the ku. So the manuo ku was the name given to the white tern. And the hino ku and the manuo hina also exist in these same realms and have similar characteristics and behaviors as the manuo ku. So giving that hina sense to the to this organism provides duality and balance. So hino ku means hina of ku, and it refers to that ahina hina color, whereas the ku portion of the name maintains the idea that this particular bird continues to forage in a ku form, similar to that of the manuo ku. It surfaces and dips and surfaces and dips, and it hovers for their fishing practice or for their food gathering. For manuo hina, that translates to the bird of hina. Both of these names reflected the relationships, identity, and functions of the blue noddy. When naming this manu, we often spoke of the balance and duality, as I expressed before, among the physical spaces they inhabit, the other manu they share space with, and the deeper connection between the goddess hina and the god ku within these realms. So collectively, these names encompass the fullness of the manu, its connection to its place in its realm, and its connection to its environment and species. So I think collectively with hino ku and manuo hina, the two names were so fitting to this particular manu that we felt it necessary just to give them two names. And it would be up to the user which name he or she felt most comfortable using at that time, which makes this process so diverse and unique as well. So mahalo nui for letting me share my piece and sharing the au'u and the hino ku with you folks. And now I'd like to transition into Noah Gomes' piece, where he'll share about the next two manu that we've named, as well as the sedge grass. Mahalo nui.
Okay, aloha everybody. So this was the first time I got to participate with this kind of naming process with the subgroup. And I, thinking back on it, I don't think anybody said, but I think it was about a year ago, like almost to the day, that we actually, a bunch of us met and sat down and talked about these species. So calling back to what Blaine was talking about the things that are considered with the naming of different species, all the different possibilities and the different aspects of these creatures that go into consideration, and the history that goes into consideration with these species. This particular bird that we're talking about now, the nunulu, the bonin petrel, reflects certain experiences that people have with this bird. So if I remember correctly, I think it was Hoku Cody and maybe Brett Mossman who had been up to Papahānaumokuākea when these birds were coming into nest, and they described this experience to the rest of us about seeing the nunulu come in, because nunulu they make burrows in the ground to lay their eggs, and they live in these really dense colonies when they come in. So apparently they kind of all come in at once. So it's like you see this mass of birds coming in the evening. And, you know, we have a slide coming up, and not yet, but coming up that will kind of show some of that. Is this mass of birds coming in to go and nest together in these large colonies. So they'll lay a single egg. These are, again, seabirds, so fish is actually a large part of the diet of this particular kind of petrel. And squid is another thing that they'll take. They're named bone-in petrel because one of the places that they also nest besides Papahānaumokuākea is the Bonin Islands, these volcanic islands off the coast of Japan. And they're interesting because they mate for life. They have like a single egg every year. Really interesting birds. On our next slide, though, we can see some of the reasons why we named that bird the way that we did. So imagine again this image of birds coming in mass, and there's so many birds filling the sky that the sky just is reverberating with the sound of all of these birds calling and just the flapping of their wings. And so as we were hearing this description, Auntie Papahana, I believe, is the one who she was listening to this, and she was like, oh, you know, this really recalls this imagery and this mele that I think a lot of us are familiar with here, Na'aumakua, yeah, where there's that line, nunului kalani, yeah, reverberating in the sky. And so it felt really appropriate to give this bird the name Nunulu because of the experience that a person has in seeing the colonies come back every year. And you know, part of this too is we're trying to place ourselves into the experiences of our ancestors. Nunulu is a bird that used to live in the southeastern Hawaiian Islands, the main Hawaiian Islands where all of us live today, but it's not here anymore. So what did that look like, you know, back in the day when these birds were here? Imagine you're here, you know, several hundred years ago, and you see these masses coming in, which is an incredible primeval thing. So I think on the next slide, we actually have that picture of, yeah, so, you know, pictures can only capture so much, right? Of the true human experience of seeing something. I think back to things like rainbows, right? You take a picture of a rainbow, it never looks the same as when you see it in person. But this is these birds coming in during the evening and filling the skies. So that's Nunulu. Reverberating is the meaning that we were thinking of when we gave the bird this name. So the next bird is Akihike'ehi'ale. And this one's an interesting one. So one of the things that is considered with the naming of organisms and places, as Blaine mentioned earlier, is do we have older names that might be recorded that we can, you know, bring back to life and restore to these species. So Akihike'ehi'ale actually is an old name. And before I get into that though, a little bit about this bird. This is a rather mysterious bird. It's a storm petrel. So they like to nest in like crevices and rocky areas. And they're another one of those birds that comes to the land at night. So you're not likely to see them. And they're real small. Storm petrels are small birds. So this particular storm petrel didn't have a Hawaiian name that was known to be attributed to it, though other storm petrels that we have in Hawaii do have known names. So, sorry, let me just move my notes. So, again, we're thinking back, okay, are there known names or are there names for birds that we think might be this bird? And there is a name, there was a name that we thought might be attributed to this bird. And on the next slide, we actually have a little clip there of it. So Kepelino Keaokalani, who is a rather famous Hawaiian historian, wrote this treatise in 1859 and 1860 about different birds that his informants were familiar with. And so many of these birds are birds that we know today, things like i'iwi, amakihi, but there's other birds we don't know what the heck they are today. They're birds that for one reason or another, the tradition hasn't been at least passed down in the general public about what the identity of these birds are. And one of those species that Kepelino talks about is the Akihike'ehi'ale. So we have the Hawaiian here. He uses V's and T's in his Hawaiian orthography, which was a thing that the Catholics used to do in those early days. So he says, it's He wahimanu ukuloa kei. It's a very small bird. Meka mama launa ole. It's very quick. He ele ele keia wahi manu. It's a small, dark colored bird, black bird. And walele pu kona lele ana like pu kona lele ana meka holo ana ona minuke amene sekona. So again, it's very, very quick. E imi no ia I kana mea ai maka ilikai. It looks for its food on the surface of the water. And then talks about how it's graceful in the way that it moves. He talks a little bit about the things that it eats. Paper nautilus and a kind of crab called poki poki are the things that he mentions. So interesting stuff. He gives a little, a rather detailed description for this particular species. And when we look at the name, akihi, it can refer to a bird with any kind of curved beak, and this species does have a slightly curved beak. But the interesting part is ke'ehi ale, walking on the waves, stepping on the waves. So anybody who's made observations of storm petrels knows that storm petrels have this particular quality where they like to, it looks like they're walking on water because they kind of hover and then they tap the water with their feet. And I'm not sure if anybody knows exactly why they do it. I think there's theories that it might be to help them balance, or it might be to help attract their prey. But regardless, it's a thing they do. So hearing this description, knowing the biology of the bird as we do today, it seems like akihi ke'ehi ale might be a storm petrel. And given that this is the storm petrel that we have in Hawaii that has no known attributed name to it, it felt appropriate that it seems reasonable to say, hey, we should call it by this name, bring this name back to life. So, going back again to what Lane was talking about, and the importance of names. Why do we give these things names in the first place? Why is this even a thing? Why does a subgroup exist? Well, names, again, they have power. For any culture, any group of humans, names have power. You hear a name, it evokes certain emotions, certain ideas, certain thoughts. Language, we're famously, he mana ko ka'olalo, yeah? Maka'olalo Hawaii. Words have names. So when we evoke these names, we use these words, we are bringing power to these things. If anything, at least in our minds, and bringing these things to greater life in our public consciousness. And a lot of these things should be thought about. We should be reconnecting with these things because our ancestors had a connection with these things, and these were useful to our ancestors, and they are a part of our heritage. So powerful things. So the last name we have is actually not a bird. These other four were birds. This last plant, sorry, and it sounds like I live in a farm. We have these chickens running around outside. Nobody owns them. They just kind of are here. But anyway, so sorry about that. This last thing that we have is a plant, Brian's flat sedge, which we are proposing to call Ahu'awakua. So it's an interesting species. It's incredibly rare in the main Hawaiian Islands. And I think right now, I think it's only found on Maui and Kauai. It's extinct on other islands. And the specific variety that is found on Komole, on Laisan, is peculiar just to that island. But it is the same species as found elsewhere. So the name that we were attributing here is specific to that variety. And so if you go to the next slide, we actually see some of the thinking behind the name. It's a rather simple name. It came to us rather quickly. And sometimes it's like that. Sometimes some of these bird names, we spent quite a bit of time talking it out and trying to figure it out and trying to analyze the birds themselves. But this one came to us fairly quickly. It seemed simple and obvious. And sometimes it's like that, sometimes it's not. It's a plant that seems to serve a very similar, if not the same function as the well-known familiar plant to a lot of us here in the main Hawaiian Islands, the ahu'awa, because of where it lives. And probably, if we were to guess, probably the use is probably going to be similar too. So that's why it has that in its name, ahu'awa. But it also, this kua part, this suffix that it has, kua, is in reference to what kua can mean to us as a people. Kua, when you look at the Hawaiian language, tends to be in words that indicate some kind of support. So makua, kaikua ana, the actual just word by itself, kua, being a backbone. So this invokes a certain kind of idea about what this the function of this plant is in Kamole. This is something that other creatures like the ekupu'u, the bird, the Lysan finch, will feed on. And also this is talking about the location that it's growing at. Again, this is a variety of this endangered species that is only found on Kamole. So kua can refer to akua, right? Aumakua, and references the fact that Papahānaumokuākea are the older islands. These are islands in Po for us who live down here to the south. It represents the kind of function of that whole area in general. I hope I'm making sense. But that was our thought process with this particular species. Again, not a bird for this one. So just to go back and reflect on these different species that the subgroup got to examine, again, about a year ago, we have Nununu, the bone-in petrel. We have Au'u, the Christmas shearwater. We have Monuoku or Hinaoku, 2 names for the same species, the blue noddy. And we have Akihi Ke'ehi'ale, which is an old name being revived for Tristram storm petrel. And again, Ahu Avakua. And from here, I'm going to pass it off to Pilika.
Aloha, mahalo, you guys. That was great. Thank you for sharing those, the process, as well as taking us through these 5 new species highlighted in this presentation. So again, I wanted to formally thank our panelists, Blaine, Hoku, and Noah, for sharing another story of Papahana. Oh, I'm gonna wait for my neighbors to go past too, with all this background noise. For sharing the story of Papahānaumokuākea, of the work our community has been contributing to within this space, and the evolution of our relationship with the world around us. As shared, the naming process for the nomenclature Hui holds many functions, including the reclaiming of our spaces and the building and strengthening of our relationships within these spaces. It is an attempt to articulate a collective present-day relationship that continues to evolve and can be passed on to future generations. And the process honors the collective sense of diversity within our group and our Hawaii. We also understand and accept the great responsibility of caring for that which is named, and work diligently to invest, contribute, and serve within this capacity. These 5 highlighted species, as well as the many others who are reintroducing themselves into our Hawaiian consciousness and universe, add yet another layer into this story we've been passed from our kupuna, added to with our lives, contributions, and experiences, and continue to pass to our children and grandchildren. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today. I hope the journey and story resonates with all of you as it does with many who have been able to weave their lives and experiences into this continuous thread between the past and future. Ua lehu lehu a mano mano, ka ikena ka Hawaii. Aloha and mahalo. We're gonna open the floor to some questions now, and I'm gonna turn that over to Brad.
Yeah. Thanks everybody. That was really awesome. We did have several questions. If anybody else has questions, please just type them into the chat, and we'll try to get through as many as we can in the next few minutes. Let's see. Some of them, I guess, a couple of the main thing I wanted to mention is that this recording will be posted later. It is immediately available on the OHA Facebook page and the Facebook live on our OHA's Facebook live stream partners. It would also be available for future viewing on the OHA YouTube and Vimeo site, as well as our oha.org/Papahānaumokuākea page as well. There was a question about the Hawaiian names for all the PMNM islands, and I had posted a link in the chat so you guys can go view that. And one more question for the panelists. Just wondering if you guys know any of the height, weight, or size of some of these species. No, that might be you. You have the most experience, I think, with these manu from a biological sense.
Sorry, Brad, could you repeat the question?
What are as far as some of these species, do you have any height, weight, or size for them?
Oh, gee. You know, I remember, Hoku, if my memory is wrong, just remind me, but I remember that that was something that we were considering. We talked about as much of the data of the biology of these things as we could. just to keep everything in consideration. But I remember we talked about the height and weight, and I'm sorry, I don't remember off the top of my head what that was for any of them. All I remember is storm petrels are small.
I think a lot of them are small, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I pulled up our, let's see, so just some quick bits of info here. Sorry, it's in our PowerPoint. But let's see, so for the size and growth for the Kihi grows to 240 millimeter with a wingspan of 560 millimeters and a mass of 97 grams. Those are the Akihi. The Ao is 360 centimeters long with a wingspan of 75 centimeters and around 350 grams in weight.
I think that one's the biggest one. Yeah, it's probably like
it's the Ao.
comparative to my head. So I don't know where.
Yeah.
The Nunulu. The Nunulu we don't have any size for. Small, nocturnal gadfi.
Yeah.
I see Alice is sharing on the chat that they're going to share info on the bird height and weight on OHA's website.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Perfect. Yeah, then we can share some of the exact measurements.
Yes.
Okay. Next question over here is: are any of these birds in captivity? I did want to mention that we weren't talking about before. Some of these names came about because actually a couple of these birds. So I think the Kihike'ehi'ale and the Nunulu are actually being translocated from the Northwest Hawaiian Islands to James Campbell Refuge in Kahuku. Yeah. And so I just want to give a shout out to the Fish and Wildlife Service and Pacific Rim Conservation for the work that they're doing to kind of help these birds in their natural habitat. So so I guess as far as captivity, that might be the closest thing as far as them being brought in to Oahu, where they've previously been documented to be before, but due to all kinds of factors, they haven't. So maybe one day we'll see some of these birds flying around. And see the next one we have here. Oh, there we go. We're on all. I guess the easiest place, I guess, would be Kaena Point. Some of these birds definitely fly around over there, but also James Campbell Wildlife Refuge in Kahuku, where some of these birds are being translocated. You may want to check out or contact the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service about that place as well. Next question. About the island names, are these island names now in the GNIS? No, they are not. And the culture working group wanted to utilize all of these names in a way. And so I think that's a process for the future of putting that into the geographic naming system. So potentially in the future, these guys can work on that as well. Let's see. How many species are still on the list to name within Papahānaumokuākea? So somebody want to take that question? How many more species there are? I guess that might be me too. As far as the species, so the culture working group and these folks here, we get names from researchers, especially the marine species that they find. This is kind of an ongoing thing, and this kind of ties into another point that we wanted to make. The group is actually meeting later on this week to discuss several Nemu species that were newly discovered up in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands. So this is a constantly happening thing. As far as birds, I believe that might be we might have named most of them. I think almost all of them, right? As far as the ones that are found besides the vagrants that show up. But we constantly are looking at different opportunities to name marine species as well as seamounts and things that have been discovered in Papahānaumokuākea. So it's kind of an ongoing process. And somebody is asking about the naming for the Makalena. I think Pilika knows a lot about this one. Pilika, you want to explain the name Makalena?
I think so the short-tailed albatross is really rare to see, especially in Hawaii in our Papahāna. I think only Midway usually gets some visits from the short-tail, and we do have some breeding pairs up there. I'm not sure about Luzon and the islands right below.
Couple of on Holaniku,
and Holaniku as well. The really, really cool thing about this this albatross, it's a little larger than Kaupu and Moli. And when it's an adult, it has this beautiful yellowish tinge that just covers its face, and it's really, really apparent. You can see it pretty far. But it changes through life. So I think in the naming process, we had like 2 or 3 different names to acknowledge the stages of, because it does resemble a kaupu in its younger stages as a juvenile, and then it flushes the complete black, and then it turns into what those pictures show, and that yellow really, really comes out. Thank you very much. So if you can see, even from really far away, you can see that yellow stand out with Moli that's surrounding it, with the regular what is the regular albatross? Moli,
yeah.
Yeah.
Kaupu is the black.
Yeah, so we really just that visual effect and being in on Midway and being able to see these birds from far and how it stands out, and that yellow really stood out, was kind of the reason why Makalena stood out. And I can't recall, sorry, I don't have it up, what the other names were for the juvenile stage of this bird. I hope that answered the question.
Kaupuakala is the juvenile name.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and its beak. Yeah. Its beak is really, really pink. And its beak is really large. So like even with compared to the other albatross, when you come across these birds, and I was really lucky, I got to spend about an hour or two kind of just laying in the grass and cruising with one of the juveniles. The beak stands out as pink, really, really pink. And then as it goes into adulthood, that flushing of yellow on the maka and the face.
Let me see. I have one photo. Here we go. One more photo. The pink didn't really come out on this one, but looks very similar to a kaupu, yeah. But little bit of the pink different in where there's the pink on the beak. So just for visual for folks. Okay.
Brad, if you don't mind, I just noticed that we have Dr. Randall Kosaki on the line on the chat. Oh. Is there any way we can bring him on to talk about some of the limu species?
Yeah, Jewel, how do you do that? Dr. Randall Kosaki, what a treat.
Yeah. Lohia Koalo being one of them that was referenced earlier.
Okay, let's see. Let's get a couple of these other questions. Is the naming process used for all animals, plants, etc. in Hawaii? Or does our group only name species found in Papahānaumokuākea? Pilika, I think that one might be you. No?
With the cultural working group, just what I understand, usually if something is found in Papahānaumokuākea, and just so everyone knows, especially as especially NOAA goes deeper and deeper and is finding and coming across more species, especially in our ocean. As you know, our oceans are the least explored region of the world, of our whole of Earth. And we just mentioned Randy, as they continue their explorations and their journeys. A lot of that is coming out of Papahānaumokuākea. Papahānaumokuākea also is like one of the largest, has the largest endemism in the world almost. Like it's, and we're finding a lot are coming back out. So I know the research that's done in Papahānaumokuākea, researchers usually will come to Brad or Randy or some representation in the agencies, and then that gets filtered to Culture Working Group. Some names that are found in, I know we did the seamounts at one point that were part of the main Hawaiian Islands. you remember, like if you want to jump in here. And I know
Yeah.
Depending, and the limo as well, depending on what it is and what researcher comes to the working group, we also will open it up to others that have spent maybe more experience in those areas too. So mostly it's Papahānaumokuākea, but we have had requests from the main Hawaiian Islands.
Yeah.
Local?
Yeah, for the most part, we've been focusing on Papahānaumokuākea just because it really is 2/3 of our Pai'aina, so there's a lot of things out there to name for sure. And this group is very specific to Papahānaumokuākea, so we've mostly, in the most part, tried to focus on those names. But there are many knowledgeable individuals on the culture working group that are involved in many other aspects across the Pai'aina, so a lot of those species out there have probably been named by some of these participants as well. So let's see.
Can I jump in real fast? Andy Collins put in some information on Makalena really fast. He said, just so if whoever wanted to know a little bit more about Makalena, Andy said that the short-tailed used to be the most numerous albatross in the North Pacific prior to impacts from commercial fishing and volcanic activities on nesting islands. So before we moved on and lost that in the chat, thank you, Andy, for adding that.
Yeah. Do you see any other questions, Kalika, while I have this page up?
There's a question asking any interest in naming now extinct species.
I saw that one. I don't know.
Do you guys have interest in it?
Wayne, what do you think, Wayne?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great idea. Being that this is largely a voluntary group, it's kind of hard to manage our time and make sure that we can field all the requests for the current living species. But hopefully that kind of lends to the scope of understanding that maybe we can get a little more resources going, potentially find other partners who may be interested in this process, find ways to get out to Papahānaumokuākea more and to connect with these species. I mean, obviously those extinct species are a part of our history, which helps to propel us into the future. So absolutely, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many names in sources such as like Kumulipo and things, right, where we have no real idea for what they're connected to. Yeah, so there's a lot of things out there. Maybe there were a lot of things before. So yeah, just very interesting. Anyway, I think we're getting to the end of our presentation. So
there's one last question.
Oh, go for it.
And that was, can we find Hawaiian names of birds, plants, places found as a dictionary of sorts anywhere? So are these names housed in any type of book, dictionary, or resource?
So we were going to put a link to the fact sheets for these newer names, right? I think on OHA's website. But if
yeah,
about names in general for organisms and places, I mean, there's place names of Hawaii and things like that. The dictionary has the regular Hawaiian English dictionary by Pukui and Albert has quite a few things in it, but I don't think there is an exhaustive list of names of organisms anywhere. And I think there's a lot of names of organisms that are not documented or not well documented, and that's part of the reason why. Sorry if anybody else.
Yeah, that's no, that's true. So for all these newer names that the Culture Working Group has put together, we do have fact sheets for all of them. Everything that we've talked about before. We're still working on these that we shared, the birds that we shared today, and the ahu avakua that we shared today. So yeah, moving into the future, that's kind of our process for now. And we just collectively try to use them as far as all the researchers that go up into Papahānaumokuākea, we just make sure that it is known that these are the species, and the more we speak of them, the more they become the name. So that's kind of been our process so far. But yeah, definitely a lot of collaborations with the Fish and Wildlife Service and all the other agencies out there that help to do these namings. Okay. So just a reminder to folks as we wrap up for today, today's webinar video is available immediately on the OHA Facebook page and our Facebook live stream partners. And it's also going to be available on the OHA YouTube, Vimeo, and at www.oha.org/Papahānaumokuākea. And so for any additional information on Papahānaumokuākea in general, please visit the website, papahānaumokuākea.gov. So just real mahalo to everybody. Thanks, Noah. Thanks, Pelika. Thanks, Hoku. Thanks, Pomaikai, and everybody else out there. Mahalo nui. Thanks for joining in, and ahui ho.
Ahui ho. Mahalo, Brad. Thank you.
Mahalo, everybody. Take care.